Great. Right. Welcome one and all. It's Rosie from back now from rather late 50th that we've shared on Saturday. Yeah. So I'll take this opportunity to thank Black Sooth West Network for working in partnership with us once again, also allowing us to use this facilities to bring you all together. My name is Windrush. I'm a lecturer at the University of West Bristol. I'm the CEO of my consultancy, Creative Connects, small organisations at large, working with Hugh and Polly. I'll ask them to speak shortly. First of all, big thank you to all of you today for coming to find out some more about how you can help the community. Thanks for people come far and wide from across the country to try and solve what is a very difficult and fractious issue within our community. I know that from certainly in terms of me coming into prominence. Some of the people may know me from my time at the City Council. I started in this very room and building when I was a positive action trainee many years ago. Some from broadcasting and I ran Gym Radio, all connected within the community. So I'm born from London and then from right to western in the city, certainly working within BS2 and within central Bristol with something that's both educated and informed everything that I do today. Big thank you to our University of Bristol students as well. Thank you to our community members and also other interested partners. We all a reasonably informal group. I'm going to keep this informal as possible, do some introductions, but I just want to, before we do that, kind of set the scene. And certainly coming from Caribbean origin, I just mentioned, being born in London. Two things were handed to me. My football team won yesterday, the reason I'm always on the top side. And West Indies cricket team was the other. Other than that, I would have been orphaned if I didn't adopt both of those two from my father and parents. But more seriously, within our community, as we grow through those people not having their papers, there's always been consistent this message about people who were a fabric of British society, and very much so. And growing up with a country that wants to reject you for the colour of your skin, I took a rather perverse notion to that. I've leaned into more of that, claiming the word empire, for instance, would be one of the honours that I've been given. When you wake up and you see blacks go home, or P-word go home, N-word go home, it kind of does something, it messes something to you. And that was consistent through the 70s, through the 80s that I grew up through, and through to the 90s. And that's why, both celebrating, welcome to celebrating our communities and Caribbean communities and given to Britain partner, commented in the book, but as well as I mentioned, Black Sooth West Network, Victoria, and St. Paul's Carnival as part of that representation, really celebrating not just our migrant communities as well. We're not that far from the other ones. From Africa, from the Commonwealth they came, and it's to me as much part of our British society. We have the claims and like that. Part of that is claiming that citizenship, so that's Windrush citizenship, and part of that is compensation. We'll talk about all of that today. I just wanted to just kind of set the scene. Got Polly at the back, Hugh here from My Future, My Choice. I'm going to tell you about the project, and then we're just going to go around and people can introduce themselves, and we'll pass to our Home Office team again. Welcome. And we want a night where we're going to have a more of a conversation, a listening event. There's no adversaries here. There's no television screens, no radio here. We want to learn more, see where we can help, and most importantly, find out how we can help those most disadvantaged within our community. So, without further ado, across to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so My Future, My Choice started a project a long time ago with the primary school. We had a ship, a big ship, and it was a passenger vessel, and the school wanted to know how they could help children understand migration. So we ran a project on the ship. This was like maybe 6 years ago, and Roger's mum came on board, and Roy Hackett came on board and talked to the children. So from there, we sort of grew this project, happened yearly, and it got to the point where we realised we maybe should do something that addressed the genuine problem, which was caused by the Windrush Scandal, by the problems that created. So to cut a long story short, we decided that education was important, because that's what we did, but we also wanted to make something happen with the project in terms of alleviating the worries for some people and sorting out problems with citizenship. So just so you know, the education project is cards. These are giants, so you can see them. It's a bit like high or low on the TV, but the pack is more like this size and goes into schools. So there's 1,000 packs of cards being produced. And they're all people from the Caribbean transnational community. This guy's a mathematician, pretty famous mathematician, and he loves the project. On the back of all the cards is the helpline number. So that comes through to us, and then it connects with people who volunteered, like Brian here, to be an advocate. Right? And to be an advocate it's not a pro bono lawyer, it's just somebody that's going to listen to a story and understand that story and help that person talk to the people that might compensate them if that story meets the criteria. So it's an interesting thing. So later on we're going to hear from the Windrush Help Team, who will explain how they are connected with a project like this. So here's a card. Thank you, Latoya. I think you're going to take that one away, actually, put it on your office wall. Thank you very much. So the project's connected with Carnival Education. The project's connected with various other activities, some of them small, some of them large, and one of them, for example, would be St Paul's Community Centre. So you might find in St Paul's Community Centre a set of these cards, not all of them, but you could collect them. You might go to a hairdresser's and collect them, but on the back of the card would be the helpline number. So that's how the project works. And we're at the point where people will start, and they've already started, to phone the helpline number. So they come through, and then we can't handle them all, but we can suggest what they can do, and then the advocate might go and have a chat with them, have a tea, and start to build a timeline of that person's life and people that is actually wrong, and that they need some sort of help in making a claim. So that's what we're going to find out today. Okay, so My Future, My Choice is an education project. It's kind of moved from being mostly school-based, mostly education in mainstream. It's moved more to education and community for this project. Okay, right. Anybody got any questions about that?
Sorry, what age group did you say when it's school-based?
When it goes into school,
yeah.
I reckon it will go, its target audience is kind of 8 to 12, but an elder would go in there and think, oh, I know, Roy Hackett, I know the Saints of St Paul's, I know. So you can have a look. There's like nearly 52 cards here. When you get them over, you can have a look through and you'll see who that might appeal to. And if you don't know the game, young people do, it's top trumps, right? So Roy Hackett might outdo somebody on activism, but not on mathematical knowledge. It's that sort of game that can be played. So really, it's about the story, and within that pack of cards, a teacher would be able to unlock a story of how the race laws changed from the arrival of the pioneers to now, and then there's a I don't know whether you ever watched Sitting in Limbo on the TV. So Stephen Thompson is in the card, so they might actually inquire into what that story is. It's encouraging them to watch that. There's lots of good people in a pack of cards that celebrates what good people have done. in the UK. So that's the nature of that pack. If you collect it, like Panini stickers, anybody know what they are? Football stickers, well done. That's so that a child might try and collect them and say to their friend, I've got 38 of these, and they go, oh, I've got 42. And so they're out looking and they're talking. But if they had a conversation with their elders, they might find out more about the heritage, more about the politics, more about this country. That's the nature of that pack. So that's the way we're raising awareness, along with activities on Windrush Day. Next year we're going to do an activity, I would think, to do with the Bristol. Well, this year, this moved on.
I'll talk about that.
Yeah, so Bristol bus boycott, and obviously working with Carnival in some way that we haven't discussed all the details of. So that's what's happening.
Can I ask about the educators? Where do they get their education from?
Who?
The educators of the children.
So we would like people to go in. So Ruth Pitter is going to go into schools with cards, but we would go as well. We talk to the teachers, train the teachers, but I think the main route that we'd like it to go in is through Carnival education.
Right.
So it's seen as something that is part of Carnival and that community celebration. So it's the pack isn't necessarily.
Can I? Sorry to cut in. Hello, back here. Hi. Those. Hi, I'm clear.
Hello.
Hiya. So are those,
this is supposed to come out in a loud way through there and be heard. Cleo, hello.
Hi. So those packs that you're talking about, do they extend further than Bristol? Because
Yeah.
I'm actually. No, they don't.
Yeah.
Oh, they do, because I'm actually based in Wiltshire, in Trowbridge.
Sorry.
And funnily enough, it's just a conversation that I was having with my daughter this evening about equality in her school, because we're part of a village. So the amount of black children in the school is a small amount of black children. And, you know, she was talking about why is it we are only celebrating Black History Month for one part of it, and so and she said, why can't we include it in everything that we're doing throughout the year, rather than it just being kind of tokenistic? And this is coming from a 10-year-old. So I was just wondering, does this, what you're talking about, can that come to Wiltshire? Can that come to Trowbridge?
Yeah, there's people interested across the UK in the card pack, so that's not an issue. It's an issue of how, you know, if we're working with Carnival, how they want to get involved with that. But there are lots of projects that would like to see the curriculum represent everybody in that inclusive way. So yeah, that's a conversation we should continue.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd like to make sure that, you know, it does continue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. A question. So the issue around certainly Black History Month is something. Personally, I'm a great celebrator. I like all celebrations. When there's National Day, 8th March, right the way through to LGBT Pride, and because it throws light, and we also have to remember communities such as prisons, or if you've come out of the care system, who aren't so enlightened as well. That's my personal choice. This year, certainly, you've got Bristol bus boycott from April onwards. It's the 60th anniversary, and violence as well. We consistently do projects with the elders. We've taken them to see Frank Bowling, who's a Caribbean elder, as exhibition at Arnolfini, and last year we did Island in the Sun during July. So we whilst we will do celebrate and commemorate, as well as the animation film that you and Polly commissioned, and is voiced by Primrose, and which I produced but directed by Michael Jenkins. Online, we do consistently put things there to engage the community and tell this story. And that will go right there up to the 1st of July, and including that once Carnival starts taking the streets. It's great to see a press release from them today. Saying that's back. So there are those things that are there, while recognising that some people don't want to partake of. For me, as somebody who's involved in community engagement, it's a good way as it is in the US as we speak for Black History Month, a good way of engaging people and bringing people together in celebration as that's the key thing. Whilst not, so that's certainly saying that Black History Month is a history 365 days a year. No, I can hold both of those things at the same time. It's a personal view, but we'd invite us to Wiltshire, and we can come along and give exactly that talk on the cards and much more. Great to see it. I see that. I'm doing some work in South Gloucestershire for the same reasons. We're very blessed in Bristol with artists and activists. 2 or 3 things on a night sometimes. Some of these rural communities in other places aren't so fortunate. So we do need to spread that word, which is why it's great that you're joining us today. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, I'm going to get to your introductions. I've spoken brief introductions, however you like, name, organisation you're representing, would that be or individual community, anything you'd like from today, and then I will pass to the Home Office to give their presentation or a question that you'd like to ask. You can hang on to that. There's a register going around so we can keep you updated and informed as well. Remember, as I said, it's informal. The first time we've done this, we're just reacting to a need of people complaining and then putting things into action. So I'm going to start on my left.
So hi all, my name is Owen and I work on the Windrush Help Team at the Home Office.
Hi, I'm Eliza, I'm a law student at Bristol. Hi, my name is Mel, also a law student at Bristol, and we work as student advisors for Bristol Clinic.
Yep, my name's Maddie, I'm a law student advisor at the Bristol Law Clinic in Bristol.
I'm Sharon. I recently moved to Bristol a couple of years ago and I was dragged along by this lady.
I'm not a lady. So I'm Patricia and I'm retired, but I have worked in Bristol for many years in the health service, retired from health visiting.
Hi, I'm Maddie and I'm part of the Windrush Compensation Scheme with the Home Office.
I'm Latoya. I'm the Chief Exec of St Paul's Carnival, working with Roger and Hugh and Polly on developing this fantastic project.
I'm Dylan.
Yay! Very dragged along with them.
Yeah. Not my patient so far.
Dylan is 13 and he goes to Trinity, but he also went to St Werburgh's School and St Paul's Carnival. He does education in both those schools. So I wanted him to come along tonight and see how it all fits together.
I'm Polly from My Future, My Choice, so Hugh's already
Hi everyone, I'm Vicky, I work on the Windrush Compensation Scheme.
I'm Sarah, I work on the Windrush Help. I'm very new, so a lot of things have changed too.
Hi everyone, I'm Ariane and I work on the Windrush Help Team.
I'm Michelle Meredith, been active community engagement outreach person for as many years as I remember. And I'm here with BSC, but I'm also here on behalf of some of the members of the community where I've sent them the flyer and they said, oh, can you find out for us, they didn't want to come tonight, so I'm here with the community happened.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane. I worked in early years education in Bristol for many years, but I've just retired. So I'm interested in this project.
I'm Charlie, I'm just a member of the community. I'm just here to learn and see how we can get involved.
I'm Sam, similar, dragged along by my mum and interested to learn more.
I'm Rosie, I just started working with Polly and Hugh, who's also my dad.
Strong family connection.
I'm Ryan, I'm a student at the University of Bristol, do law, and I'm part of the law clinic as well. We already provide pro bono legal year, but we've expanded and started the Windrush project to help people with more complex cases get the compensation they deserve.
It's good. Everybody knows me because I was talking earlier.
Excellent. And what's going online? We have.
Hi, I'm Cleo, and I'm just wanting some information on behalf of my mum who came over on the Windrush, and she's got paperwork that she needs support to fill out, and so I've been tasked with supporting her to fill it out. So I'm just, here for some information, and it's also good to hear about other things that are going on as well, and see how it can be implemented over in Wiltshire. So that would be really amazing if I could make some links to, incorporate that over our way.
Brilliant.
So there's just, there are two people from Bath, from Fairfield House, from I think it's called Bemsker, Bath Ethnic Minority Senior Citizens Association. So they, obviously that's in, going out towards Bath would be important, but they're supposed to be online, but they're not.
Would those people be on that screen so that we can see them?
That's frozen. That's Polly walking past, and it's frozen. So we're waiting for that to actually operate a presentation. So we're not doing right. But Cleo, you're all right there. There's supposed to be a sound system in here that picks up that, and Cleo's voice would be coming out of it, but it's not. But we're getting by.
We're all right.
Yeah, we're all right.
So if nothing else, we've got great links from our rural links, and we've already got that connection. We've got people from Bristol, her team, and also that the roots of activism are well within the family trees, as you can see, as a great beginning tonight as well. So without further ado, we'll come to our main guests, and thank you for coming in such numbers, and also great that you've linked up with Hugh today. I think, I'm presuming, as Marion's holding the papers, and I've done this a few times, that you're going to lead. So I'm going to hand over to Marion from the Windrush team, and then afterwards we'll just have a Q&A. Anything that you have, let us know, Cleo. So, over to you.
So, thank you, first of all, good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Just want to say as well, really interested to hear the conversation and the different things that are happening, because already my mind's starting to think about how we can link in different ways. There's three main objectives for us in the Windrush Compensation Scheme and the Windrush Documentation Scheme. So in the scheme is to make sure that people get the payment that they deserve as quickly as possible. Secondly, it's that they get the support through that journey, and that they feel as though they've been supported and received. I'm going to call it a customer service, because that would be the easiest way of putting it, but they felt that they've been able to get in touch and ask questions. Excuse me. And thirdly, that one of the main things we want to do, and that's why it's great to be here, is just get the message out there. We know there are more people out there. We acknowledge absolutely that people are frightened to get in touch. We receive phone calls from people every day who said it's taken a long time to get in touch, but they've been encouraged by friends and family. And when they have an interaction with our help team, largely, and I won't say this in all cases, but largely people say in their feedback that they'd be happy to consult people. But we're not naive, we're not getting in touch. And equally, they don't want to get in touch with the Home Office at all, even though we present ourselves as the Windrush Compensation Scheme and the Windrush Documentation Scheme. We are part of the Home Office, obviously, and so we want to make other routes that people can then just submit claims directly to us without the need of having to come through to the Home Office if that's not their preferred choice. So I just wanted to sort of introduce that. What we've actually prepared for you all this evening, because we have spoken to you a few times about to support the Windrush Compensation Scheme. So we've actually prepared a presentation to talk you through really how you can best help people, to give you a little more background about the scheme, and to explain, as I say, we want people to submit the best possible form. We want people to understand their, not just their eligibility to apply, but
also how the status issues have impacted them. I mean, I can throw it out there right now that we get a lot of people who get in touch with us and they have suffered terrible racism, continue to suffer racism in all parts of their lives. I was in outside in Manchester here last week with a group of people, and they talked about their children not getting the same opportunities in school because they're from minority backgrounds, etc. And whilst we can support and help and influence in different ways by spreading our word about Windrush compensation schemes, we're not in a position to help with those bigger issues that they're facing. They also have people from the council there, and they're looking to get support that way. But what we can help with is people who have suffered as a result of their status, so we want to really sort of clearly explain that as well to you all. So we need to sort of get that spread of word. All my colleagues, including myself, who were here, either volunteered as soon as they worked in this area of work, and all have applied for roles that have been advertised purely for the compensation scheme, not to join the Home Office, but to work with the Windrush scheme. So everybody here falls into that. And indeed, Joe and Ahmed joined when it was the documentation scheme on the first day, set up a help team within a couple of days, and Joe and Ahmed have both done a lot of outreach work in the communities. So honest to say that my team's the help team, the vulnerable persons team, you'll hear about those more, but they're all the people that work on those teams have volunteered and want to work there, and then have said that they want to stay on those teams and not go back to other work. So it's just to kind of include that in your messages. So the things we're going to go through are, we're going to talk to you about the Windrush. It was called the task force to start with. That's the status scheme. It's now called the documentation scheme, and the importance of demonstrating the lawful status. The claimant and advocate support. So we also work with an organisation called We Are Digital that you may or may not have heard of. They support on claims assistance, and the important thing to also let people know about We Are Digital is that people can refer themselves to them. So we've had a change in that area where people can come to us and we can refer. Some people don't want to come to us, so naturally we're where people can self-refer, and that's working really well. We're getting a lot of people self-referring for support. We'll go through this in more detail, but we also support for deceased estates, people who are applying on behalf of somebody who has passed away, and their estates claims. They also support on probate and being able to obtain probate, which is one of the requirements. We're going to go through the different claims, talk about the losses naturally claimed for, so that's clear to everybody. And that's part of, as advocates, really listening to the stories that people are telling you and going through with you. Naturally, they can be very painful, very upsetting stories. People, rightly so, take a lot of time, and for some people, just having to bring back up all those emotions and go back through that is really, really challenging. But through that story, you'll start to be able, I think somebody mentioned timeline, but not just a timeline on what's happened over a period of time, but a timeline of the different impacts that are happening for people. So we'll go through that as well. And then also, I mentioned kind of the, the sort of suffering racism versus suffering as a result of status, which some could argue is ironically part of racism, but we want to go through kind of that sort of managing what those expectations are and the process of the scheme. A really important thing is, and I think this is fair to say, people can get a form and look at a form and just think, wow, where do we even start with it? So a real look at kind of the closer information that caseworkers would use, and also how caseworkers could also look at other areas if people don't have certain documentation as well. And then because this is a pilot, because we haven't run it anywhere before, and Hugh was really kind in working this up with us and letting us come and do this, we then like to ask you guys for feedback at the end. We don't see this as a one-time only thing. We want to take this to other areas. And also we want to be able to sort of catch up back with you guys if you do some of this advocacy work later, so in maybe 2 or 3 months, and get some feedback from you then about how you found this. Is there any further information you need, what can help you to do this kind of support work to people within your communities. Thank you.
Yeah, we're having problems with the presentation. What's the best way of looking at it, do you think? Yeah, probably if it reaches.
This might be obvious, but have you switched it all on and switched it back on again?
It's not my kit here, so it won't connect with that. We tried it. It was all running, but it's not working too much.
Any experts?
Any experts?
I think if we can see at either end, you guys know it off by heart anyway.
Through or fault night.
So-
I thought I had a cable.
Can you bring that up bigger on there?
Okay, yeah, sure.
You can connect.
I thought I had a cable for that, but I left it at.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, we do. Are you still there, Chloe? Yeah, she's still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, so feel free to stand up and peer if you can't get close to one of those screens.
So,
Is that all right?
if we're ready, I'm going to pass over to Arnold and Joe. They're going to take you through some information about the help team and the documentation scheme.
Hi, evening all. My name's Ahmed. So we'll start about the Windrush immigration scheme, which is now called the Windrush documentation scheme. So it's established in 2018, and it's for all long-term residents of the UK. Anybody that was here before December 1988 can get out with their status. So under the scheme, there are a number of things that someone can apply for, depending on when they came to the country and what country they came from. So these could be confirmation of their British citizenship, could be naturalisation or registration as a British citizen, and that will enable them to get a British passport. There are other immigration documents that someone can also obtain in the scheme, so that could be right of abode or confirmation of settled status, so status that they already had but couldn't show. So that is the number of things that someone can apply for compensation. So there are a number of categories that someone can fall into. So it's either you're a Commonwealth national, you came to the UK before 1st of January 1973 and have lived here since. If you or anybody that you know falls into that category, then you can apply for citizenship. Again, it could not just be you, but if your parents came to the UK from a Commonwealth country before 1st January 1973, and they've lived here since then, and you were also either born here or came before you turned 18, you can also get support with your documentation. So it's not just your parents, children as well. So, yeah. And then the last category is for anybody. So although it's called Windrush, it's for any nationality. The all long-term residents in the UK can get help with their status under this scheme. So I think, was it Paula? Sorry, I forgot the person that's in Wiltshire.
Chloe.
Chloe, yeah, sorry, Chloe. Hiya.
Yeah.
Chloe mentioned that her mother needed support with her status.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can have a chat. I don't know which screen she's coming from. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, Chloe, yeah. So, yeah. Apologies. So we can definitely have a chat after and see how we can support you. But yeah, as I said, it's for all long-term residents of the UK that can apply under the scheme if they were here before December 88. Yeah. So anybody that you know, or if they may be too hesitant to come forward, then please feel free to take our information and pass it along, and we'll be more than happy to help. Yeah. So that's the status side. So we'll go on to the immigration side. Sorry, the compensation side. So the scheme was launched in 2019, April 2019, and the compensation schemes for people that have encountered issues because they couldn't demonstrate their lawful status in the UK, and it could be a number of things: work, they couldn't access benefits or housing, and we've put systems in place to support those people make claims. So that's why we've got a contract called We Are Digital, who have been helping people submit claims, help them complete the form, gather information, and just put in writing what they've encountered throughout their time in the UK. So it's a free service that they can use. Either they can have be referred to We Are Digital by ourselves, or they can contact We Are Digital directly for support. So We Are Digital won't help people submit the immigration applications. It is purely for compensation, and also probate. So we'll get onto probate in a few moments. So that is We Are Digital. So essentially, they help put in words what the customer or the person that's been impacted has suffered. So they'll be able to look at the type of forms they need, the type of information that they can get, and fill out the mandatory sections on the form. And this could be either face-to-face, this could be over the phone, depending on the person's circumstances. It could also be a home visit when, if needed, in exceptional circumstances. Yeah, that's We Are Digital, and we on the helpline also support people putting claims. So we operate a callback system where if someone's new to the scheme that calls us, that wants to seek assistance in applying, we operate a callback system where we dedicate extra time to go through the different types of claim forms, how that person has been affected, and which claim form is most appropriate to them, and discuss the different categories as well that someone can possibly claim for. So yeah, as I said, so on the initial call, we do try and give them as much information as possible for them to make the best decisions for themselves. And obviously, if they have been impacted, then we do encourage them to pursue a claim where they are impacted and they deserve to be compensated. Right, so who can apply for the scheme? So this is anybody that has suffered because they couldn't demonstrate their status. As I said, it could be they couldn't work, couldn't find a job, couldn't seek benefits, they couldn't travel. So some people couldn't travel for fear of not being able to return to the UK, and there are circumstances where people have left the UK and couldn't return because they didn't have the right documentation to show their status. So going to hand you over to Joe. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Joanna. I'm one of the compensation. I work in the compensation scheme, and I'm one of the quality assurance managers. So when we're talking about who can make a claim for compensation under the Windrush compensation scheme, so what we're saying is that it's anybody that's suffered a loss. So as I said, that we established that when we set up the scheme and we have people making calls, that we're realising that if they didn't have their status to confirm that they've got a right to live in the UK, that they were losing access to services such as benefits, employment, and then sometimes obviously that would, on a knock-on effect, it would mean that they lost their houses, and because they were going to services such as banking, there were people asking for documentary evidence to show that they had a right to open bank accounts. And if you just think about generally as you go along in your life, what you need to provide documents for. So all these individuals were actually experiencing great losses because of that. So the scheme was set up to actually provide anybody that actually experienced that loss. So firstly, we said that they had to, as Ahmed said, that they needed to resolve their status. So either through the scheme, they would have to make an application to get their citizenship, and then or to get their status to say that they've got leave to remain in the UK, and then we would consider compensation. So when we designed the scheme, what we decided to do was to split it into 3 categories of people that could claim. So the first category, which is our claims calling the primary claimant, and that's the main person. So if you can imagine that you'd actually enter the UK and you'd actually had personal, so we would say primary claimant, that's, and then we've also acknowledged that people have been in the UK and they've been in it quite some time, and then they've now passed. So we set up another category for the estate of a deceased person. So that could be through the representative of the estate, that they can make an application for the person that's passed. And then we've also got another claim type, which is for the close family member. So that would be, for example, if you've got a partner, a brother, a sister, your parents that actually were going through difficulties, experiencing and trying to demonstrate their status, and you provide some form of support to them, whether that's financial or an impact of life as a result of them not being able to demonstrate the status, you can make a claim under the close family. So that's the main 3 types that we've got.
We've got a question. So do you know what portion type makes up the overall claims?
The majority of primary claimants,
Okay.
vast majority, yeah. But obviously we're seeing more estates, I think, as more people find out about that category, but also as the ageing population, people that can be affected.
And then what we're trying now is, once the cases come through to the team, we're trying to encourage close family members to actually put in a claim. I think if you all watch that Sitting in Limbo, the eye was moved by how the impact was not just on the individual, but it was on the family members as well. So we're trying to encourage more close family members claims to come through. So the next we're talking about is the estate claim, so I'll let us discuss that one.
Yeah, so with the estates claim, this would be someone that was the primary claimant, but have sadly passed away. So someone that can deal with their estate on their behalf will need to apply for compensation. And one of the documentation that we need is something called either grant of probate or letter of administration. That is just to show that they can act on behalf of that person's estate. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to look at or compensate the families of those that have been affected. So as I said, the majority of our claims are primary, but as I said, we do get some deceased estates claims. And one of the things that we have put in place is support to obtain probate through We Are Digital, and we can also pay a few the fees associated up to £1,500 for a successful probate application. So not only it's identifying the type of claim, and also helping them obtain the documentation in order for them to progress that claim. So there's a number of things that we can do. So if someone's passed away and they've left a will, they will look at the person that was named as the executor of the will, and if sometimes there is no will, then we'll look at the next of kin. So that could be a spouse, parent, or a child, and we help them obtain probate for them to go ahead and proceed with their estates claim. And as I said, we could cover the cost of up to £1,500 for successful probate applications.
Can I just ask a quick question? How is it resolved when the primary client dies of a medical condition that they weren't entitled, that they didn't receive healthcare on because they were deemed aliens or illegal? How is that resolved? Is there any sort of legal any legal help for?
When you say
If a family member has died because
They
they
couldn't
weren't
access.
able to access healthcare appropriately, what happens in
that
that?
is also, there's a category for health in the actual application form. So if someone's been denied service, NHS care, all public services because they couldn't show their status, then that they can apply for that under the scheme.
Their family member will be able to.
Their family member can put in, if they've passed away, their family member can put in a deceased estates claim and claim under that category issued with healthcare, accessing health services. So that is, yeah.
That links quite nicely onto the next slide actually, because the next slide.
Sorry, just
So
a
can I
quick
just
question.
Can I just say one more thing as well about the deceased estates claim? It is something that really slows the process down for people if it's not the correct person, and we obviously have to go out because we sometimes have quite large sibling groups and somebody wants to put the claim in and then they're trying to progress that and then we say, well, it comes to light that they're not the person who is the person that is the person that's the executor, etc. So it is something that can take a long time. So in messaging that's going out with people, it's really helpful if you can give that person that submits a claim in the first instance, and that will just speed it up for them.
Sorry, as well, you said that you provide like compensation for the legal costs up to £1,500 for successful probates, but if they're not successful, do they just have to?
Yeah, so we'll try and give them as much information possible before they actually apply. We can't stop anybody from applying. We want to encourage people that are eligible and entitled to apply to put in a claim. However, as Marion said, there's some people might be eligible in a family group. Someone might be the executor, but the executor doesn't come forward. Maybe another family member does, and we try and get the right people to apply, whether that's through direct contact with the executor or through the person that has applied. They do advise of who is entitled to apply, and we do have those honest conversations with people, just so that we can give them the best possible support.
So next slide about losses which can be claimed for. So when we designed the scheme, the compensation scheme, we tried to cover every scenario possible. So if you can sort of categories that we've mentioned. So the first one in the top corner talks about immigration fees and associated legal fees. So that covers so what we'd ask the question is, did the customer pay for any immigration applications that were not successful? We do have quite a few applications that we received where we've received the product, what we would call the product. So unfortunately the scheme doesn't cover that. But if we've had somebody that's made an application and the issue was that they weren't able to demonstrate that they got a leave to be in the UK, then we would consider looking at giving them compensation for that. And then the associated legal fees, and that goes up to £500 towards the legal fees of any unsuccessful application form. And we gave the example earlier about banking. So that's, I mean, this one, for us, when we're looking at compensation schemes, this one's a bit tricky because when you go to a bank, they don't normally give you a letter to say we've refused access. So on balance of probability, if someone can demonstrate that they've actually attempted to go to a bank, and it's got to be, so when we look at all these categories, before I sort of go on, it has to be because somebody's been denied access because of their status. So we have scenarios where people have said, if I give an example for housing, if somebody was refused housing because they didn't meet the criteria for the housing category or the area, they weren't in the area, for example, or they needed to get some points towards the scheme that they were going towards, that's not to do with status. So all the categories that we talk about here, it's got to be purely because of your status, that they were denied that. And the generally, if somebody asks them if they've got a right to remain in the UK, if they've got, sometimes they ask for a passport, and sometimes that's not necessarily because of the status, it could be a form of ID. So it's like when you're asking questions, you've got to try and define clearly with your customers that it's a status issue, not an ID issue. So we've done immigration fees, banking, health. That was the example that you gave when you were asking about your family member. If they've actually tried to get some assistance or medical help and they were denied NHS treatment because they needed to provide evidence that they were resident in the UK, that we would look at that. And there's been people that have actually come across or when we've looked at their applications or applied for medical care, that they've been asked, they've been charged overseas fees, and then that's something that we look at. I don't want to go through them too much, so I'll try and clump them together. Education, that's if somebody, when they've applied to go for further education, and again, they've been either charged overseas fees or they've been asked to demonstrate their status. And then I've got the employment one, is the sort of one of the main ones where the employees have asked for them to prove that they've got the right to remain and work in the UK. That tends to be a big one, and we see some really successful awards on that, and I'm quite proud of how the scheme's developed to do that. The benefit ones, we've got the two, which is working family tax credit and child benefit. That's issued by HMRC, and we sort of work closely with those to get credits back to them, and also we give them compensation for the experience that they've gone through the cost of that loss. Homelessness is if somebody's being made homeless as a result of their status. Detention, I think detention, deportation, and removal, I think they tend to speak for themselves if somebody's being deported. If you watch the Sitting in Limbo, that was one where this gentleman kept on being sort of removed from his house because his status and put into a detention centre. We sort of can look at that situation. And then I think the last two, so we've got impact on life and discretionary. So the impact on life isn't, it's sort of a holistic approach to the whole claim, and it talks about the emotional impact that the individuals experience as a result of it. And that's where we talk about giving them awards. And I think when I talk about personal experience, that impact on life is, we've done really wonders on the scheme on that, and actually considering people's feelings and being sensitive to what's actually happened to them and made awards accordingly. And the minimum level one starts at £10,000, and the maximum we can go up to is £100,000. And we have lots of case conferences we'll all vouch for, sort of arguing the case to get these as high as we can, and we work with lots of people to get as much as we can for these customers. And then discretionary, that one covers whatever we can't cover under the scheme. And I think that's it, really.
In terms of the banking, I didn't quite understand, there's no evidence that they couldn't get banking services, but supposing they were part of a loan, a community banking loan scheme, is that evidence enough if they had to go towards a partner scheme, like to their own families or whatever? Would that count as evidence of having to raise money from outside? Does that, is that evidence enough?
I think the banking is about banking services, isn't it? So that loan service, is it talking about something that goes within the family? Like
it could be within the family, it could be within the community, like gardener, or it could be a terrible loan that you've taken out. Yeah.
It doesn't come under the banking.
Do you mean if they were refused at, say, Barclays, that was their only alternative?
Yeah.
It would be something that we would look into, and it would be one of those take it in the round considerations, because if somebody had a bank account and then didn't, and this was their alternative, they may not have evidence of it being closed, but that part of that timeline, that's that event. If there was no evidence and there was no bank account, and then all of a sudden it was just in the alternatives. It'd be something that we would look into.
Okay.
It wouldn't be, I can't say yes or no in terms of.
I'm just thinking of the advocates,
But
they're
we'd look
talking,
into it.
yeah,
It
they're
would
talking
form
to
part of a bigger picture.
they're talking to somebody, and the story unfolds that we couldn't get this, we couldn't get that, we just got married, and so we turned to this, and I've got evidence that we bought a fridge, and I've got evidence of this, but we couldn't go to the bank and look on it normally. We had to do it this way. That's all really.
And definitely it's helpful to mention it,
Yes.
because it's also, it builds, it's part of the bigger picture, isn't it? And when we're actually looking at compensation, if we can't sort of fit it, if it doesn't fit the requirements under a particular category, we can see holistically it's being impacted. And do is we, as managers, we sort of try and consider the total impact under the impact on line.
Yeah.
And show compassion on that side.
So if someone's denied housing because they weren't able to get a credit check processed, because they weren't able to, kind of get an account with the bank, that's not directly because of their status, that's because of the bank account not being available. But what would that come under then?
That would be impact on life.
Would that be just, and if you, do you have to like label it, or and if you label it, are you guys quite holistic with the approach to,
Just because you put something under one head of claim, it doesn't, you don't look at it tunnel vision. We get applications where somebody's put something under one head of claim and actually it's something totally different, or you mentioned, this is something that I'll go into, but you mentioned this particular part of your claim, but actually we can pull it out and this applies to something else that you might not even have thought of. So just because somebody puts it under housing or employment, that's not where it stays. If it's not in the right place, or it can be expanded, then it will be.
Just a question on that is, how long does it take from the start of the process to the end? Because I've heard so many stories, I don't know if that's the same way, people have applied for, for this, to get compensation and they're still waiting, and years later for the money to be paid. So has that changed?
In some cases, yeah. So the claims are assessed in date order. There are issues with some claims that are more complex for us to work through than with others. We have issues with probate, as we mentioned. Some claimants we struggle to get back in touch with. There's various kind of things that, there's no claim sat there not being worked on in terms once it's been allocated to a caseworker. But it's kind of that churn of cases getting through the system that has historically been quite difficult for us. We were a very, very small team when things first started, so we were already on the back foot in terms of being able to get through applications. We're constantly building a caseworking team, but they have to be trained and then go through the code of mentoring, and then, once you start picking up a claim, you've got to start that information gathering process. So the turnaround of cases at this point in time is a lot faster than it was 2 months ago, but it's not within a couple of weeks.
No, so yeah, it's come down, hasn't it, to about, on average, about 8 months.
I think so, yeah.
But within 6 months, within 6 weeks, everybody will have 6 weeks of becoming eligible, and will come on to this slide, people will have had a preliminary assessment, and at that point, if somebody can be awarded the £10,000, then they are at the 6-week stage. So again, that's a change since the start that's been brought in, which obviously has been much welcomed by the team and our stakeholders, because that means that people can get that part of the payment as quickly as possible.
Have you got thousands? How many sort of claims roughly do you think that you're handling currently?
So somewhere in here there's another transparency. So it's on the transparency data in terms of so each month it's published on gov.uk. And I can't think off the top of my head, but it's less than a couple of thousand at the moment, isn't it? Yeah, less than a couple of thousand, but they're at different parts. And I think one of the another message that was mentioned just then by Vicky. We sometimes, and we understand why, because people have busy lives as well, but we do really struggle sometimes to get the customers to come back to us and to come back to us quickly. Or, you know, even when we refer people to our digital, they haven't, you know, we say to them, well, you haven't met this sort of service agreement to turn this around in this time frame. And then we've changed their data because the majority of people, it's customer behaviour. So we've got back in touch with them and said, oh, I'm not ready to do that now, or now COVID's lifted, I'm going on holiday and I won't be back. And we've had quite a lot of that in the probate world, where people have gone overseas for a couple of months, 3 months, and all that time the claim just has to sit at the moment, and we don't close that down at the moment. So yeah, it's often customer behaviour, but there has been, as Vicky says, we've had to grow the team and grow it quite quickly, and it is very complex, and there's a lot of training, so we've really worked hard to get people up to speed as quickly as we can, but that does take a lot of mentoring and support to make sure that people are considering everything and that the quality of the decision is correct.
Can you say that you've seen the level of trust increasing as time goes on?
Yeah, so of course there's frustration. We have a high volume of calls where people are chasing us, and we acknowledge that our feedback to customers in terms of how long it's going to take and what the timeframes are is poor, and we have to improve that. So we've been working on a piece of work to think about customer contact and improving that area of work. One of the things that you know, we don't see the sense in giving people necessarily an update if there's nothing to update, but we want to make sure that people feel supported and handled through their journey. So we've been taking some feedback as well, and feedback from customers on that. So we're going to improve more in terms of hopefully with customer feedback, that contact piece of work, and how regularly, and also how we hand people off. And particularly with the preliminary assessment, obviously not everybody gets the £10,000, but some people will still then get the payment at the end when they've had the full consideration of the claim and more information is being gathered. But again, it's about, even if you've got to phone somebody to say, you've got your letter, you haven't got it, but you explain why that decision is, and then you explain to the customer what's going to happen next in the process. So we have acknowledged that in the push to really drive up the levels of casework and be able to put people and resource that area, we haven't necessarily supported customers through that journey in the way that we would like to, and there have been big gaps in their knowledge of where they are, and so that's something that we're really focusing on now in terms of caseworker interaction with customers, the front end interaction with customers, and then at the end of that, the back end interaction is when somebody has received an award at the end of the decision. We've just introduced the contacting people afterwards, of course. I mean, you know, myself, if I was to get £75,000 tomorrow, it would change my life in many ways. And obviously, particularly with our vulnerable customers, some of them suffer, like, you know, across the whole population. We have people who are addicts of certain types, we have people who suffer domestic abuse, we have people who are in significant debt, we have people who are being, you know, pushed by their family members to share their award, etc. And so we've got some kind of, we've started to contact those people, and we will signpost them if they need that support. And we've had really positive responses from people saying that really be happy to provide us some further feedback and get back in touch with them, because it's really difficult. And I always say, nobody really wants to be the poster boy of the Windrush compensation scheme. We understand that completely, but it's really helpful for us if we could have a few more people that are happy to talk about their experience with us, but hopefully that will encourage other people to touch with us.
Sorry, did you say the maximum compensation so far has been 10,000?
No,
that minimum.
Minimum. So if you're up to 100,000, I thought I heard you say earlier something.
Under impact of wildlife assessment.
That's under one category, so that's the line. But then if you were to make an application across several categories, then you know the award would be so, wouldn't it?
I've got some
this question.
Oh, yeah, so yeah,
Now,
okay.
now I'm gonna check, have you been listening?
All right, so first question, our customer has been in touch and has wanted to know whether they're eligible to apply for compensation. What's the first question that we should be asking?
When they came to the UK?
Who they are, who the person is, whether they're the primary client or
They come in
claiming on behalf.
Could, yeah, like, or more.
And length of
Commonwealth
time.
and when they came.
Yeah.
Issues
what-
because they couldn't demonstrate
Demonstrate
their
their
status.
status.
Yeah,
Yeah.
status.
Yeah. So it's status related. So first question, and then we'll ask you, yeah, we'll ask first, what's your name first? Then we can go on to, yeah. But yeah, this, after the introductions, so then when we speak, yeah, but yeah, the first thing is, was it because of you couldn't demonstrate your lawful status in the UK? So yeah, second question, a customer said their father had suffered losses because they couldn't demonstrate their status. They've now sadly passed away. Can they put in a claim? Yeah. What claim?
The deceased status.
Perfect. Everybody's listening. So third one. So a customer's called the help team, very upset, and they've explained that they've lost their job because they couldn't prove their status. And are now wanting to apply for compensation. Can they put a claim in?
Yes. Yeah.
What should they do before they put the claim in?
Status.
Status.
Yeah, yeah. So status first, and then we encourage them to put in a claim. So yeah, that's good. So I'll pass you on to Laddie.
So I'm going to take you through the claim process and what's going to happen once we get a claim. So when the registration claim, when the claim completed, goes to the registration team, and first of all they're going to check that the claim has been completed correctly. So they want to know that we've got all the necessary documents that we need, that the declaration page has been signed and ticked, and everything there. Because we want to look at that bigger picture, they're also going to start by doing those other government department checks. So they're going to reach out to DWP and HMRC, you know, to see if there's any benefit losses and things like that. So we're starting to build that picture at that early stage. They may get in touch with the claimant as well at that point. They might be going out to ask for a leave of authority to give us permission to speak to representatives on their behalf. We may need a medical consent form if we're needing to go out to GPs or something like that. And they may be in touch to like verify their email address, that kind of thing. Once their eligibility has been confirmed, they will send a letter. At that point, and this is where it's really important that we make this distinction, we have confirmed that they are eligible for the scheme that's based on the criteria that we discussed earlier. It doesn't mean that they are automatically entitled to compensation. That assessment hasn't happened. All we're saying is that you are eligible for the scheme, the assessment will come later. To make an offer of compensation, the caseworker needs to be able to determine if the claimant has suffered a negative impact as a result of not being able to demonstrate their legal status. So, I'm just going to give you an example just to demonstrate. So Mrs. M was born in Jamaica and she entered the UK in 1968. She was registered as a British citizen and has never had any issues because of her status. She's eligible for the scheme, but would not be entitled to any compensation because she hasn't had an impact because of her status. Mr. R was born in Barbados and entered the UK in 1975. Mr. R travelled on his mother's passport and has had problems proving his right to work in the UK in 2003. Mr. R applied for status under the Windrush scheme and was granted citizenship. So he's met the eligibility criteria for the criteria of the scheme, and he's also going to be entitled because he's had an impact. I'm going to go back to my little diagram. So, as Marion mentioned, once the claim has been considered eligible, it will then go on for a preliminary assessment. This will happen within 6 weeks of that claim being determined to be eligible. This is just an initial assessment only. It's just for £10,000. If an award cannot be made at that point, it does not mean that compensation will not be later awarded, it's just that initial assessment. So once it's allocated, the preliminary assessor will look at all the information available to them, and they will probably reach out to the claimant as well to ask for any additional information that they might need. They will then, as Marianne said, they will call them and then we'll talk through that decision and explain it to them. From last week, we had a rule change as well, which means that within that 6-week period, if the preliminary assessor, if they identify that that claim is a zero entitlement claim, so that there is not going to be any compensation, instead of doing a preliminary award, they will do that full and final assessment then. So that will still happen within 6 weeks. It means we are going to be getting through claims much quicker. It'll still get the full consideration, they'll still have the same right of review, but they're just not waiting quite as long to go through the whole casework process. So that's the preliminary stage. From there, it will move to what we call the workflow hop, where we're just waiting for that case to be allocated to the main casework in space. The workflow hop. So the caseworker, they will look at all the information that they have available to them. They will might reach out for any additional information. Vicky will speak to you a little bit about how we can help, what they're looking for. And then from there, it will go on to our quality assurance team, where Joe's from, and they will be checking to make sure that the standards are consistent and all that stuff. Once the decision has been made and we write out to the customer, the claimant then has the opportunity to either accept their award or they can request a tier 1 review. If they're not happy and it goes to tier 1 review and they've not had a preliminary payment already and they've had a monetary award, they can take a £10,000 payment at that point while they wait for the review to be concluded. The review team are completely separate to the caseworking team. So claims are allocated out in date order, and it's someone who will work on that claim who's not been involved in that claim previously. What we find is that a lot of people, if you get your final decision award and we'll explain why we've not been able to make an award, and that can also sometimes prompt people to think, oh, well, I do have that, so they'll send in additional information then. That's fine, send in as much as you can later, because we will assess it as part of tier 1 review. But the tier 1 reviewers will also be coming out with additional information that they've identified as well. So after that, they'll make their decision and they'll write out to the claimant with that decision at that point, and it's back with the claimant again to either accept that award or to reject it. If they reject the award, at that point then the claim will be reviewed by an independent reviewer in the adjudicator's office. So we will send across to them all the information that we hold on that claim, and they will do their own independent assessment. The adjudicator's office will write to the claimant directly themselves with the outcome of their review. So we will also follow that up, but the outcome of that review will come direct from them. One of the bits that's really important, and it's sometimes a bit misunderstood by claimants, is if the adjudicator's office, if they want us to reconsider a part of our claim, they don't make a decision themselves, they make a recommendation to us. So that review then needs to come back to our tier 1 team to be reconsidered. It will be by a different tier 1 reviewer, so it will never go back to the same person. But then there can often be a delay between the customer getting that outcome letter and that new decision coming. And that is the end of the process within the scheme. So I'm going to pass over to Vicky now, who's going to start you through gathering information.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Well, whilst all this to and fro is going on, what sort of information is going to ask the customer? Are they running every couple of weeks, or do they have to ring in and find out what the status is?
So that kind of depends on where we're at.
Yeah.
So if we're allocated, so if it's with the prelim team or if it's with the caseworker, then there's going to be that regular contact. If it's in the workflow hub, that's where there's often not much contact, because we just wait, as Marianne said, it's an update, we just wait for that claim to be allocated. Once it gets through here, it kind of moves quite quickly, it'll go through QA quite quickly and on to the pay team and will process it. Again, the tier 1 team will be the same kind of level of contacts that you get in caseworking, and at tier 2, because that's kept separate to us, any contacts will come from the adjudicator's office, so we're not really in touch with claimants at that point. So it depends where you are in the process, but we are looking at how we can improve that and extra contact that we can get in.
And we do also say to our customers on when they contact the help team and the caseworkers, say that if there's anything that changed, because things change, don't they, for people during their journey, and they may either remember something else that was quite traumatic, they may have a change in their lives that impacts them at that point. So we just say at any point, get back in touch with the help team. You know, some people, we've had people going through the journey and then they've had to be referred to the vulnerable team because they're going to be made homeless and stuff like that. So, you know, different things happen for people, illnesses, etc. And at any point, you can get in touch with the help team and we'll direct them accordingly or support them through the vulnerable team.
Who works in the?
Same question.
The adjudicated office is with HMRC, so it's completely separate to us.
Right,
Yeah. So when they obviously give us feedback, we make sure that that's shared and so that we can build on that and, you know, see where we can improve. Any other questions?
Just one more question. You know, you mentioned that a lot of people don't come through. Because I should imagine don't want to pick up the phone because if they're here, so illegally, and if they're heading over the parapet, then they're going to be escalated to the government office that says, right, stand on the plane, out.
Yeah.
So I mean, what sort of assurances do you give to the, if you can?
So we have a sterile corridor with immigration colleagues, so examples of that are we just don't deal with them at all in terms of giving out information about English customers. We also, for example, I gave this example, say if somebody was picked up for an immigration offence, not a criminal offence, it was somebody that, say they went into a workplace and said, there's somebody here and we don't have, you know, they haven't got any documentation. If either the immigration office or the police contact us, we will have the authority to tell them that they should be released. Obviously, if it's a criminal offence, we can't do that. But so yeah, so that kind of thing, and we do tell people that at our outreach events as well. And I think it's really true to say, isn't it, Joe and Ahmed as well, that you know, outreach events initially. When we started to do them, you would see groups of people, say at a community centre, on the opposite side of the road, and they wouldn't come in. They thought they were going to come along to the community, and then they see that the Home Office is there. And it's been, you know, trying to do as many different events and different ways of getting in touch. But things like this, you know, going and talking to different stakeholders, and Ahmed's done a piece of work where we ask customers for feedback, don't we?
Yeah.
At the end of the call, and we're up at sort of 97–98% of them who have said that, say 60% have said that they didn't want to get in touch, and it's taken a long time because they were frightened for that very reason that you've explained. And now 98% of the calls have said that now they've spoken to the helpline, they will tell their family and friends to do the same, and they'll send a message. And we have some callers who actually, whether this is a good use of civil service resources, we can take to them, but you know, they're ringers, they're elder with their peer groups, some of them have passed away or returned overseas. And we've got a famous gentleman who literally rings and he has a chat with us often, but we've worked and supported him through such a difficult journey. I mean, you've got your own group on it, Joe, that you talk with. That sometimes it's just saying, have you been to your club? Have you met with your friends? Have you done something? And it's just trying to, I guess, show everyone side of the home, really, because, you know, that we've been on a long journey with these people, some of these people over the last few years. And if it takes a 10-minute call every so often just to check in, then why not? You know, it's the right thing to do.
And just to check with the adjudicators, presumably they work the same as you independently from the other side of the Home Office. They don't feed into the Home Office.
No, they're just working with the Windrush compensation scheme, and that's who we've got the, I guess, I'd say contract, but it was it's a memorandum of understanding with them, yeah.
Can we swap so I can sit there so I can see that? Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. Hi. Okay, so. So, I'm going to speak about the approaches that we've got for gathering information to help build, as we've talked about, the timeline for individuals. So I'm going to go through what our caseworkers do and why they do it. And you're likely to see areas that you can help to support them on, or even depending on the relationship that you've got with somebody, if it's a positive relationship, that you can help to direct them or identify some evidence that can help support that application. It's all about what kind of comes out of that relationship that you've built. Right? So, this is just like a bit of background information, I suppose, to kind of help build that picture of what happens. So, the role of the caseworker is to assess all the available information that somebody has in front of them and to carry out further investigation to make sure that the claimant receives the right award that's in accordance with our published rules and our guidance. So it's not about getting the maximum award. We've had kind of feedback from stakeholders about that's not the right approach, it's making sure it's the right award. So this is all about making sure we've got the right award and it's in accordance with everything that we've got published. Caseworkers have an evidence gathering role, so it's their duty to work with claimants to get as much appropriate information as they need to make that right decision. This is very much a shared responsibility between the caseworker and the claimant. We're mindful that everybody is different. So sometimes claimants work closely with caseworkers to gather specific information. Perhaps their application was really sparse and they might not have known what to include. The application form we know is very white, it's very blank. That was for a reason, you know, so people can tell their story on it, but that can look quite intimidating. Sometimes the application forms are very, very sparse. On other occasions, claimants have submitted everything. They will tell us there is literally nothing left for them to give. They don't want any further contact, they literally just want the decision. Both scenarios have got their own challenges for a caseworker in terms of information gathering. As I go through this, I'll kind of do it as though we've got an application that's sort of in the middle of both of those extremes. So Joe mentioned the balance of probabilities. When considering an application, the evidential threshold that the caseworkers use is the balance of probabilities. So this means that they need to decide whether an event is more likely to have occurred than to have not occurred. Those of you doing the law stuff at uni will be very, very familiar with it. Like teaching this, okay. So, alternatively, compensation can be awarded if the caseworker is more than 50% sure that an incident happened. Why do we use balance probabilities? So, we know that a lot of people claiming under the scheme might not actually be in a position to provide any documentation. If incidents have occurred in the past, people would never have known that you need this piece of paper to demonstrate that this particular event happened or that this had this impact. That's not how we work, you know. We just don't keep all that. People just don't generally keep all that information. So the balance of probability evidential threshold was introduced to allow us to be fair to individuals and make an award if we are more satisfied than not that something happened. And this is the thread that weaves through all applications. And what caseworkers have in the backs of their minds when they're considering the compensation application that is in front of them. Caseworkers take, as I've said, a holistic view of the application. They look at the evidence and information before them, and that includes circumstantial information as well. So, how can you help in the decision-making process as advocates of this scheme? To help us make this balance of probability decision, the caseworker firstly considers, as we say, the information that they've got to hand. That usually compromises information submitted by the claimant or the rep or yourselves on behalf of that individual. Comes alongside, as Maddie mentioned, the various other checks that we do when an application lands with us. So the checks that we would do initially are those of the home care systems that we have access to. So it's if somebody's applied for a visa, if somebody's applied for leave in the UK, if they've applied for a passport, we can check all that. We've got all that, or most of that. We also request information from other government departments, namely DWP, HMRC and DVLA. They will see if there's any supporting information that they can give us that would help with that timeline. So whilst we can perform these checks on certain systems, we know for reasons specific to certain individuals that different names, dates of birth, addresses have been used. That makes those checks more difficult to do. So if during the course of conversations that you have with individuals, if an alias is mentioned or referred to, please tell us about it. We know the reasons why people use aliases. That's not a concern of ours at this point in time. We need to help establish that footprint. So if you come across an alias, in whatever form that is, whether it is a name, date of birth, an address, an email, anything, tell us. Also, because the time limits on retaining data, it might be that data has been destroyed. So if a claimant has evidence from any previous applications, tell us, send us that information. It's all helpful for building that footprint, building that timeline, building that story of what somebody has. So if, for example, that banking situation turns up, it's just one piece of a jigsaw that all counts, that is all considered. We know that people don't always keep documents from decades ago, which is why that holistic consideration is really important. And we aren't focused on just one bit of evidence, it's everything in the round, and then we apply the balance of probability threshold to it. So examples of information that we're interested in from both our checks and what claimants could submit would be things like aliases, any previous applications, previous passports, any travel documents, birth certificates, school and uni records, employment history documents, family history, any evidence of your addresses, property ownership, rental agreements, NINOs. We cannot do DWP checks without an NINO. National insurance. You're all going to remember that now. Any marriage or civil partnership certificates, medical, dental records, bills, letters, anything like that. So when we're looking at the various heads of claim that Joe went through, if a claimant can support their application with documentary evidence or maybe a statement from themselves or somebody who was witness to what happened, it's definitely a starting point. It helps build that picture. It's all about building that context, building that picture. If anything more is needed, the caseworker will reach out and ask for it. If we need help gathering pieces of evidence, we will reach out and ask for it. It might be that we need contact details for a particular employer or something. We will come out and ask for it. As an example, if someone is claiming that they lost their jobs because they couldn't demonstrate their lawful status, you could ask questions like, who were you employed by, what dates, when was it terminated, do you have any documentation stating why it was terminated? We have seen letters where they've said specifically, that's fabulous, it's not, but for the purpose of it. Did you ask anybody for help? Sometimes people reach out to MPs for help, if they've got any MPs letters. Do you have any documentation about the salary or the wage that you were paid? That helps us calculate that employment calculation. It's about, wherever we can, trying to give us a picture of what happened, where, when, why. If we need to contact employers, councils, doctors to get some of this information, then we will do. And we can try and do this on the claimant's behalf as well. Another example is the impact on life. So for this, when we've been trying to kind of get that information from a claimant, it's been really useful to ask the claimant to take us through what's happened. The kind of things that we have in mind for this particular category is things like, when did you first realise there was an issue with your status? What caused you to realise there was an issue with your status? What did you do once you realised there was an issue? Did you seek advice? Did you have any documents at all that demonstrated your status? What documents did you have? Were there any other issues?
Can I ask a question there? Supposing somebody's travelled, they've gone to Jamaica, they're coming back, but they want to go back by another country, and they're denied access to that other country for some reason because of their passport. It doesn't. They've actually got a British passport, but this is a real case I'm talking about. But they're denied access to going to Amsterdam or somewhere like that, and is that sufficient? I mean, I don't know why that would happen, because I'm not an immigration lawyer, but it seems to be that there is something there that would warrant investigation. So you had to take a different flight and go back to the UK.
What passport would be travel?
That's what I don't know. So I'm just wondering.
I think that might be something outside of the status related. Because if
I
you've
think
got
that would be to do with the Amsterdam officials, to be honest. That's their decision whether they want to grant entry or not. That's not for us.
Right, okay, that's answered, yeah.
That's their officers that are granting entry or not to that country.
Yeah, so
not ours, so I don't know.
Ours would be if they couldn't go because they didn't have a document because of.
Yeah, so I said, have you got a passport? So yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a British passport, then yeah, it wouldn't be something that's...
Just didn't like the look of it.
At least you can renew it.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
Okay, so as you can see, there's no hard and fast rules around this information gathering, and there can't be. Every claim, every event, every individual is different, and they are treated as such. I can't give you a list of what you must ask for, what you must not ask for, what you can ask. It just isn't possible. The best advice I can give is, I think the starting point would be to have a basic understanding of the heads of claim, of the different categories that there are. Then try and ensure through the course of your conversations that you've got a full picture of the 5 W's, the when, where, what, how, that kind of stuff. If there's evidence, provide it. If you can't, tell us about the incident, the event, in as much detail as you possibly can. If we feel it's relevant or there's a key piece of information in there, then we can pull that out and we can take steps to either contact somebody or to gather that bit of information. Work with the caseworker. They will guide you. If something isn't needed, they'll say. If something is needed to fulfill a particular policy requirement, then they will ask for evidence in that area. As with most things, casework in particular experience is the thing that will help you through, which is something that I can't just give. It's one of those things that just comes over time, because you will be able to pick out key incidents, events, key words that somebody says, and I think one of the tough things is that somebody could tell you war and peace on one particular thing that's really important to them, and it's really important that they get that out, but it may not be something that we can put under the policy. But there may be something within that they don't particularly think is important, but actually really is. So that kind of ability for somebody to have that relationship with you and to get that out can lead to various other different things. So the aim here is for us to work together to try and get as much of the right information as we can.
I just add to that, because I think when we talk about the impact on life as well, it's mainly about the emotional impact it's had on them. So whilst when you're picking out bits from them, if you just keep on saying, how did that make you feel during that process? Because then that gives a more realistic emotional impact, isn't it? And then that bumps up each of the categories into it. Because some people, when we do talk about the 1980s cases, some people could go through it and have no impact or no emotional impact at all, and some people could just fall to pieces. And then that is the difference between awards isn't it? So it is about how it's made someone feel.
So, how can you help progress that application? One of the best ways you can do this is to help gather that information. If we write out or call to ask for further information, it's because there's a gap in the timeline, or we need something to fulfil a particular policy requirement. Without the evidence or the information that we're asking for, we might struggle to meet that particular requirement. Also, as I mentioned previously, on occasion claimants can have been affected in more categories than they've specifically cited or submitted evidence for, or perhaps through the relationships that you establish with claimants, you can identify more categories than they are specifically claiming for. As an example, a claimant's focus might be on speaking to you about the difficulties they experience when they were subject to racism, perhaps losing a job. But through that conversation, you've mentioned that you could spot that they've mentioned that they didn't have a passport, or that they didn't have a particular piece of documentation that would help them with something. So whilst we can't compensate for the racism element of it, there are other elements that we can pull out, that we can do, that we can look into. So you can help us out here by picking out certain elements of a claimant's story and helping shine that spotlight on it, pointing us in the right direction, essentially. If you or the claimant are unsure as to whether an event falls for consideration under the scheme, tell us about it. We'd rather you go overboard than not. Send us the information, tell us about it, give us anything that you've got on anything. We'd rather have it than not. The worst that's going to happen, we can't consider it under a particular head of claim. So, a couple of interactive scenarios for you. Testing you. Of course.
Is there a standard application form?
There is. So there's an application form for primary claimants, for estates, and for post-family members.
That's a form.
Yeah, as I say, they're very white. There's a little bit of writing, and then there's a big space for you to put in what you want. So that can be fine if you want to tell us, if you're quite happy to kind of write everything down, but that can be intimidating for some. So there's not a lot in it. But yeah, if you've got information that you can kind of give us a timeline on, a picture, an event, kind of fill it with the quantity of information. There's like, go for it. It's there. If you need extra space, use extra space. So Sarah came to the UK in '63 from Mauritius, and she's lived here ever since. She first began to experience difficulties demonstrating her status in 2014. In 2015, her bank account was closed. She was forced to withdraw £10,000 in savings, and it meant she lost out on interest. What kind of questions would you ask to help build that picture of Sarah?
Does she have a letter dating the bank?
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, what was the impact on her closing that bank account?
Yeah.
Because you can't just go into places sometimes with large sums of money because they want to know where you got it from. They think it's, related to drugs or whatever. So that's a big impact on her lifestyle.
I want to know what happened between 63 and 14. Why all of a sudden did something happen in 14? Doreen had an offer of employment working as a receptionist at a local skip hire company withdrawn because she couldn't provide documentation to prove her local status. The yearly gross pay would be £18,456. Very specific. Amount.
So in that situation then, did she get the job?
She was offered a job and then it was pulled.
But when she went for the job, did they say they were going to ask for that?
It would have been one of the requirements to demonstrate your right to work in the UK.
Question is, what would we ask in Dory to support her claim?
Because, well, I would say, well, if I didn't have the status, and I knew I didn't have the status, and that job was offered that status, I wouldn't put myself forward for it. Because I know they ain't gonna get it. So that was the question, you know, did somebody encourage you to go for it? Because
Why did you leave
just-
that job?
Yeah. But there are other jobs out there, so why did you want to go for that one when you knew there was a criteria that, you know, you had to fulfill?
I think in that time period, a lot of organisations were asking for proof of status. But that's when the
But before that, that hadn't been the case.
Before that, that wasn't.
Right.
So now,
Okay.
organisations, not just private, but government organisations, everybody
They had
asks
to
for
provide a
status.
passport for a job back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So doing
Yeah.
probably went alongside Sarah in good faith thinking, and then maybe not even realising that she had an issue with her status until the offer was withdrawn and she looked into it. So you would go back to questions about, well, when did you arrive in the UK and establish that eligibility element.
I would ask, so the next example, I'd ask similar questions for Derek. Yeah, so Derek had worked for a small company for 24 years before being dismissed. States his monthly take-home pay was £1,200. So I'd be looking for both Dorian and Derek. What did the lack of employment then what was the knock-on effect of that? You could be looking at housing issues, you could be looking at, you know, debts, lots of different things.
So just a question. So like, value of money has gone down by like 10% in the last year alone. So is that taken into account when compensation is kind of calculated?
It depends on which area we're looking at. So the everything's tariffed in terms of the benefits and things like that. It's set figures. If somebody was dismissed if somebody was dismissed in 15 and didn't get a job until 2018, if we had evidence of their wages, then it would be on their wage at that time. We don't kind of add anything on for inflation, anything like that. If they don't have evidence of their wages, then we have set tariffs in terms of the minimum national minimum wage at that during those specific time periods. So it's tailored to the particular year that you're talking about, but then we don't go back and say, well, the interest rate was such and such and start messing about that.
And would there be a problem if he or she couldn't provide a wage slip and they couldn't provide a letter saying they were dismissed? Would you then have to?
If we'd got one or the other, so if we'd got the letter that showed that they'd been dismissed, and you could clearly see the employment had ended, but they didn't have any evidence of the wage, then we would go on the tariff figures, the general employment award, we call it. If we did have the wage slips, then we would do it on the evidence that we've got.
You never approach previous employment where they were previously employed, for example.
If the claimant didn't have a wage slip, could we approach the employer? We have done that.
They sign it and give us permission to make contact with the employer. So we make, and if they've got that information, we try and get contracts and also wage slips.
And we also have the contacts with an HMRC where we exchange the information, where we can seek the information to show their earnings. If somebody was self-employed, they're not going to have the same stuff.
And I think just picking up on that, and what Vicky's been saying about that impact, they are the really important questions because, we were just saying, I just said to Joe, we're not only, losing your job, which means you may not be able to pay your mortgage. And I think we also that from the programmes that we referred to that's on television, the impacts it has on your family life. Some people suffer and have divorces, etc. And we've seen of that as well. And so, whilst we don't have a category that says divorce, we do have a category that says impact on life. And so it's important to improve all that information.
You'd be amazed how that impacts even on children. See the parents go through that and sort of probably like something as simple as parents withdrawing from the because they're so worried about that, you know, children can then make a personal claim for that worry that they experienced as a knock-on effect.
The last example I've got is Ken, who works part-time, 20 hours a week, 4 days, over 5 days, as a self-employed, 4 hours a day, over 5 days. As a self-employed dog walker, he had, I love the details. He had to stop working on the 31st of May 16. His lawful status was confirmed on the 17th of December 18, and he started working on the 2nd of January 19. We do have some examples, we do have cases similar to this in terms of kind of the dates when things start, stop, and are resolved. So with these, we'd be looking at kind of the HMRC records in terms of wages prior, how he survived in the interim, and then I suppose you're kind of looking at the impact on life is a major thing here, but also, you know, were you able to keep your house? How did you pay your bills? What impact was it on those around you? All that is there's a lot of things that can stem from one particular issue, and you can know the policy inside and out, but it's through that one-on-one conversation and that relationship that you build up that things start to kind of come out and drop into conversation. And if you don't know which particular part of the form to fill it in on, do a statement, put it all in the impact on life. As I said, we look at it all, so if we need to put it into a different category, then we will put it in a different category. But if it's very long or complex or things are really interlinked, just write it down, just send it to us.
So that also worthwhile thing to familiarise yourself with the guidance as well. Useful thing to familiarise yourself with the guidance. Use it on the website and just read the bits that we've published. So where would we look in the Windrush?
You go on the gov.uk, yeah.
In what, sorry?
Just on the gov.uk, just the government website, there's the Windrush Compensation Scheme information, there's the rules, there's the caseworker guidance.
Claim forms, it gives you scenarios of who needs what.
Yeah, there's also the contact number for the help team and also details of We Are Digital to help.
So as advocates, could we fund the help support team?
Yeah. So if you can make the initial inquiries first, it's regular contact on behalf of the individual, then we do need some form of consent from the person that's affected.
I mean, they could give you the power to do that. But initially, we just want to work together until we get the answers. And it might be easier for you to ask the question quicker, and then easier for you to explain it to somebody who's not that, isn't online, isn't sitting by a phone and can pick up the phone and do that deed. So if you've got, if you sign that register with the contact us, right, an email, we will send this PowerPoint, should have been on there, and really well done to the Windrush team for handling it like that, because it was, I think in some ways it was clear, because you were talking to us with the knowledge that we couldn't see that, so it was brilliant. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question in regards to that? At the start of your relationship with a client, do you draw, is it you have a written agreement that you may, on their behalf, be able to contact? Is it just a verb? Is it verbal?
It's part of the declaration on the application form that we can and see what information other government departments hold, especially for, say, someone's claiming under employment where they might not have a letter from their previous employer. We can go through their records and see if they were employed for X amount of years, and we can see, well, at that point they've said they had issues with their status, so that kind of corroborates their story and their journey.
Can I also just mention, you mentioned We Are Digital a few times.
and obviously people can self-refer or be referred by the help team, and they support people to complete their claims, as we've said. There's quite a lot of myths about how the eye digital will work with people. So some people said they're only allowed 3 hours. We appreciate that sometimes for very traumatic experiences, it takes a long time for people to be able to tell their story, to understand what it is that they want to say, understand all the different elements of what they need to try to pull together. Quite quickly in the relationship with VR Digital, we made a change within the contract, and people, so our standard kind of booking time for the appointment is 3 hours, but for anybody, VR Digital can contact us back and say we need to make another appointment with this person, we need to see them again. We've also said to VR Digital, because meeting somebody for the first time and trying to build that rapport and what can be quite, a difficult relationship, we've said to them that they can chunk the 3 hours of however they like, so based on the customer's need. So if a customer says, well, actually, I don't think I can do more than an hour that day because it's just too upsetting for me, they can just chunk that period of time up. We obviously have a standard time because we are, we have a relationship with them and a contract with them, but they can come back to us, and they do come back to us, and they ask for extended periods as well. So if people do want to be referred, and that's another option, as you can say that if people want to go to VR Digital, they can be referred to them, but they mustn't worry about, what about if it takes ages for them to do my form.
I just wanted to ask a question, because I obviously sent out the flyer, and I spoke to somebody today, and they were saying that about application forms. Can we get that, or can we get that onto the gov.gov?
Yeah, you can get all the
Because she said, oh, she's been waiting ages to get the application forms, I don't know what that meant at the time.
Is it a physical document or is it?
Well, she said she wants to claim on behalf of either parents or whatever.
Yeah.
The words she said to me was, I've been waiting ages for the form to arrive. So I didn't really know at that stage, but I know now.
Right, okay, so it might be that the person's requested a physical copy to be sent to them.
Okay, so I need to check with her what she meant by that, because she can go, if she hasn't got the form, she can just go online, download it and print it off. Okay.
Has the form changed over the recent months? So the forms I've got in my office, they're outdated.
It depends on what version is it, August?
Well, no, it was before then.
Okay, so it's new ones.
I had them in June, I think.
So there's been some categories.
Okay, we've reached 8:30. So any questions, queries, comments, observations? At this point for the Home Office team.
Well, I guess this is more just like in terms of being an advocate. Would there be any training on like Windrush Scandal? And so obviously I don't really know much about it, so I wouldn't feel comfortable going and trying to pull information out of people's stories in case I was missing something important.
Yeah, I think we're happy to sit down and talk with anybody who wants to know more about it. But the history of the story, that I think it's a case of that we're not.
Which it would depend on what precise part you would want. On the actual scandal itself, there's some really excellent online videos. There's been Amelia Gentleman. There's been David Lammy's speech in Parliament, and there are some real bite-sized 5-minute. I've got the links I can send you. That's the Windrush Scandal. On Windrush in general, I've got a number of fact sheets in terms of the history. So we can tailor anything towards your needs, but you can sit with Q, I'm Polly, but the 5-minute YouTube videos, a collection of them, David Lammy's speech, who's MP for Tottenham, and Guy Leeds MP is one of those famous speeches that has been in the history of that scheme.
Yeah, it's a piece of history that's missing from education, and we're putting it back in. But if you go on Wikipedia and you look at why that happened, you would get to grasp it. But I think if you wanted to be, moved by it, then Sitting in Limbo, it's available on iPlayer. You watch that. you'll get most of the main components, and you'll also get a true story that should make you think, okay, I understand why there would be so much effort to put this right. Yeah.
We could definitely put that together.
Yeah, and I referred that to someone last week.
And what are the next steps? What happens next?
So we get phone calls. A lot of them, well, they're not a lot of phone calls, but it's pretty clear that the claimant isn't a claimant from the conversations, and they're keen to hear from us about where they stand on this, that, and the other. So we have referred one person to the Law Society because they got a claim against the NHS. And a lot of people will tell me their story, and if I'm asking them, do you have citizenship status, they'll say, yeah, I've got a passport. So their story is very, it's one in which they could claim against somebody 30 years ago for some wrong, but it's nothing to do with this activity. So there's a filtering process that's going on, which is quite useful all round, but I've got to make sure that I'm not stopping somebody from making a claim. So I might say, well, I think you should talk to somebody else and move it on. So I might ask.
What happens actually if we fill in the form, claim for someone, and you saw the evidence, oh, actually, this doesn't relate to the status, but it does relate to some injustice to do with NHS, whichever. Would you be able to highlight that or go back to them or not? No.
No, so in terms of the next steps, let's just suppose somebody phones up and I think, yeah, that's definite, and you phoned this helpline, then we would think about who would be closest to that person, who might work with that person, phone up some advocates. It might be that they want to go in as a pair and have a conversation. It might be that the advocate wants to come into an office in town. We'd have to try and arrange that. They might want to meet in here. They might want to meet somewhere at home. They might be able to leave home so easily. So we talk about it, and then that process would kick off. But the main thing is that you're making this bridge to the help team, and then the help team are answering the questions successfully, and there's a kind of team of people helping that person, and that person has become aware that they're not in jeopardy from this process. So that's why it would work. The other next step would be you go away from here, you're better aware, you tell somebody else that you're better aware, and that person tells somebody else. You might receive a pack of cards, give me a postal address, you get a pack of cards, they're lying around. You might go into a juice bar and you see the cards there and you say, oh, I know, and you start a conversation. People become aware that there's help available, and that's useful. So they go, oh, great, and they go and contact the helpline. They go online, they're pretty savvy people, and they sort it, or they phone us. It doesn't matter which way it goes, but more people are coming forwards to get the compensation, because I think it's some statistic, I can't remember what it is without, but it's only like 20%. So the anticipation is that only 22% have actually made a claim that are eligible for a claim. So there's obviously people out there that could claim. I'm not guaranteeing that statistic. I read it like 2 months ago. So, but these guys, they want to get it to 100% so that they lose their jobs.
Far more people have gone through the documentation scheme than have claimed compensation, significantly.
Yeah.
And within those that have gone through the documentation scheme, we feel that there's probably a good chunk of those that they are eligible to apply for compensation, but that they may have been impacted as well.
Yeah.
And that's the people that have already come to us, and I keep saying, not naive, there's surely lots of people that don't want to come to us. So the more that we can get the word out, we're going to be doing more things like outreach events, this type of event where we work with different people to get more information that they can support people I'm recruiting a couple more people to help so that we can try to do potentially things with schools. We can improve the customer contacts. So all those things, thank you, will be ways of improving. But really, it's about, I was saying to you earlier, it's the Caribbean community. Yes, that we've mentioned the whole Commonwealth. We really struggle with getting into the South Asian community and being able to get the people there to understand what the impacts may be for them. So just anybody telling anybody and having a conversation just does that spreading of word. People that churches they go to, mosques that they go to, things like carnival events and meetings. Just anybody just saying, I met with the Home Office. We hope you thought we didn't see you at that brunch. And just give them a ring. They don't work with the immigration enforcement. Get in touch with them. They'll have a and you should be satisfied whether it means you sort your status out or you do or you don't necessarily have a claim, but somebody will have a chat with you, and that's really what we want.
So the next step for me is Thursday, we've got a review meeting of this, so we're in touch. So if you wanted to join in any way, you would say, oh, I'm going to be an advocate, I'd like to be involved in the review meeting. It's online, nobody has to travel 6 hours on a how many hours to Sheffield?
Three. The feedback is really important for us, and going through all this, we know now you don't know what you don't know, but in a couple of months, you can look back and think, well, I want to, if you could have told me more about X, Y, Z, less on this, didn't get that at all. That's what we need to know, because if we keep, this is the first of this type of engagement event. We've done a lot of engagement as the Home Office over a number of years, but we've not done it in this kind of forum for advocates. That's entirely new to us. So anything that you can help us to learn from this would be really beneficial. If, through the course of conversations in a couple of months, you want us to do more detail about the different claim categories like Joe was going through, if there's more detail on that you need, or anything, that's what we need. So the review in a couple of days is kind of first impressions of what this was, but we want to pick up on that later. We need to be able to kind of keep doing these and get better at them and make them right for what they're for.
Like roadshows would be good, like stands, because you said, because people might feel less intimidated if you're at, it's a public area, and they can just walk up and say, oh, most people come and say, what's happening here then? But and then if you engage in conversation with them, then they might open up initially. If it's in a public place, it's busy, then they're going to feel less intimidated to cross over. And
I think we've done outreaches and we've gone into church conventions where there's masses of people, and then we would have a room separate. We sort of do an introduction, and if it's in a safe environment like a church, then we sort of talk about our backgrounds, and it does help the fact that we're sort of going into an environment that we are familiar with, so they don't see us as being the enemy. And then we also have the private conversations, and we've had loads of people that come to us and say, well, I've come to the UK, what shall I do? And it's like,
you've got to
There's also another way, there used to be loads of group support, well, I say loads, there used to be support groups for different ethnic groups of people, and that's another way to engage, I would think, with them. I don't know how strong those groups are, since funding has been pulled away. But Southeast Asian
yes, we're open to try everything. I think that's one thing that we're going to be working on, isn't it?
There's a new campaign as well, media campaign in Jamaica that's just going live, isn't it? That we're doing some work on what we actually gain from that, because obviously, as I said at the beginning, we've got these 3 objectives, but we need to make sure that we're putting our resource into where it can add value. And we're starting with a baseline, we want to see the improvements from that. And that may not mean that we get tons more claims, but it may mean that somebody understands where they stand in terms of the position that they're in, and it may mean that somebody's happy to say, actually, I wasn't impacted because of status. Yes, I've had all these other issues, may need to go to the NHS, I may need to go to the benefits people. But the status part, I understand it, and if that's an outcome for somebody, that's a good outcome.
I mean, disadvantaged groups obviously are usually the ones who don't come forward. And then there's some who are even more disadvantaged who don't engage at all. So it's about how you best, yeah.
So we do things, I did one little example, I'm sorry, but on the vulnerable persons team, we had a lady who was, it took a lot to get her to communicate with us. It was through her mental health advisor, and then the only way that she could be communicated with, she wouldn't look at posts that came through her door, she didn't answer, she didn't open anything, and she built such a relationship with one of our vulnerable persons team workers, that they just used to do a little squiggle on the back of the envelope, and then they knew it was from her. They'd open it and it was her saying, "Can you call me and I'll give you a call back?" And that was, she, you know, and she said, she'd explained she'd got piles of posts, all behind the door.
Was that an issue?
Yeah, yes, and we have had those types of issues, but yeah, she could, but it was just that she completely sort of switched off from everything, and it was just this kind of, you know, little squiggle, and it's just thinking of little ways to reach out to people that will help them.
Okay, any other questions, comments, observations as we draw to a close?
How do the potential advocates feel about this? Do you feel supported? Like, what on earth would happen? What would it be like? How do you feel? Let's start with the law students.
I feel delighted knowing about the processes.
I think you're delighted about any information.
I think it's definitely having like the Home Office kind of come out and actually explain the processes, especially like, because, you know, as law students we tend to just look at the law and look at how it works and how it applies to different scenarios, but actually being shown the processes and examples, it just gives us that little bit more confidence to kind of know the process that goes on behind the scenes, because obviously people come into the law clinic, we listen to their stories, we try and follow the timeline, we get advice from our supervisors who are all fully qualified, but it is just quite nice knowing how the other side deals with the process, and it gives us kind of confidence to tell our clients what will actually happen in certain scenarios. So I think I feel a bit more confident, I think.
Thank you. Sharon, you want to say something?
Yeah, basically, I was quite ignorant to the fact that there is such a thing like this team at all. I wasn't aware that there were a team actually out there helping those people that have been affected. I didn't know.
Yes, and me too.
So now you can tell somebody.
Because when someone said to me the Home Office team, I was like, oh really?
That's right. Because I was quite saddened when you said, oh, enforcement, I went, oh, that's happening. That's we're still generating those responses.
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite
Home
common.
Office,
Yeah, it's really good.
Feel guilty, just, you know, even if you're not guilty, you think, oh.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Really thickly.
Okay, I just want to pick up on a couple of the points. We've got what I've shown is the citizenship, the documentation. You've got the compensation. You've had that input on. You spoke a little bit about the education. We'll continue to do that in our celebrations. There's the bus boycott starts from April, 60th anniversary, and Windrush 75 on June 22nd. Specifically, you'll see a number of events going right the way through to the 1st of July, which is Carnival Day, and then we'll take that into Black History Month through October, which will continue the project. So we're reaching to the schools. So the onus is on you as well. Thank you for the advocates as well. Whatever training that's needed, you can just get hold of us. We'll tailor it to what you need. We can do it in the thimble, or I can lecture and talk to Guyana or England, depending on which side of the bed I go out on that particular day. So the cards would be spread out into the schools from crossing the coast. We're looking at that. This all came about from yourselves. So we've I've got a long relationship with Polly and Hugh, but you wanted this training, and Hugh and Polly arranging it with the Home Office as well. I'm glad that you can see a human face, real people. Really wanted to, apply for the job and work for that. As I said, it's not we're not in an adversary position as far as I didn't take any DNA tests, but there's no related to Theresa May, who started Hostel Environment in the first place. A bit of education for you to look at. In all seriousness, and thank you for taking the time for coming down, getting away from. I hope you've had a good time in Bristol. Our thanks to Black Sooth once again and Carnival for their points, things like the roadshow that Michelle mentioned. We'll take that on board. These ideas, this is what my future, my choice, Correct Connects. All we do is listen and try and enact. We don't have all the answers, but we know people who do, and bringing people, communities together to help others less fortunate. Both organisations we're here to do through University of Bristol and my organisation as well, U of Bristol as well. So I think that's about everything. Anything that from you both? Any final questions, queries, anything from the
final question for me is that the flyer that we sent, there's a number on there. Is that the number for you? It was a Bristol number on the flyer.
Yeah. These numbers are on there. Take some flyers, spread them out, put them in barbers, and we're trying to reach different community people. And don't forget also, it's not just extended through people of Caribbean descent, it's also from people who are Syrians. I heard that loud and clear from the South Asian community as well. It's not just from our foreign, we extended it like we've done for the like we did when we had the Bristol Bus Boycott in 63 through the 65 Racial Relations Act, which is now the 2010 Equalities Act. We extend all of that help for everybody and all. Thank you, one and all.
Has everybody given their email addresses? You want to give them?
We'll only use that for future contacts.
Oh, right. I don't know who that is.
Then, there's nothing further.
Should we give the spontaneous round of applause? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I think I'll see you on Thursday. Back to the hotel. I would be told. Talk to